Welcome to Is Your Company Ready to Restore Operations After a Ransomware Attack? My name is Danny Cherry. I'm the Principal Consultant and CEO over here at Danny Cherry and Associates Consulting. Some housekeeping tips real fast. First question thing is if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A panel. And either myself or I've got John Morehouse on the call with me. We'll get those answered for you. And it helps to have the right application selected. There we go. Feel free to ask any questions you have throughout the session. Don't save them all.
Is now joining.
And we'll get those answered for you as soon as we can. There is a time delay on any questions that do get asked. So keep that in mind. So anything you ask may be a little bit delayed before we answer it, just because there's about a 20 or 30-second delay between my talking and you hearing it. That's just the way Team Live Events works. If for some reason you can't hear what I'm saying right now, there's the phone number to dial in if you need to actually dial in and listen to things. So I want to talk about 4 basic things during the webinar here. The problems that we face, some people solutions that we can implement to help solve problems, some technical solutions that we can implement to help solve these problems, and then how to actually recover from an attack in the event that you are actually attacked and breached. Since the goal here is obviously to not have these things happen, but we need to be prepared in the event that they do actually happen. So we need to be ready for some problems to happen. So the big problem that we face here is obviously ransomware. So how prevalent is ransomware and how prevalent are these sorts of attacks? Well, the numbers are actually kind of frightening. So back in 2018, the FBI stated that there were 1,493 ransomware attacks throughout the US. So that is a decent amount, considering these attacks are all basically based on or geared towards companies, because that's where you can get the largest amount of money if you hold a company ransom as opposed to holding a person ransom. How bad do these attacks get as you move forward? Well, between 2018 and 2019, they went up a decent amount. In 2019, they went up to 2,047 attacks that were reported. Now, keep in mind that that's a very important phrase, that were reported. A large number of these attacks are not reported to the authorities, so we don't actually know how high these numbers should be. The reason companies don't like to report these sorts of things is fairly obvious. They don't want to admit that this happened, and they don't want to publicly show that this happened. This is a very sensitive subject for a lot of companies. Now, in case you're doing the math, that's a 37% increase in 1 year from 2017 to 2018. We don't have the numbers for 2019 as it just ended, and those numbers have not been published, at least as far as I've been able to find them. So how much do these sorts of attacks cost? So the actual cost is obviously unknown, because we've got so many companies that aren't actually reporting how much they've lost, how much they're paying, and the fact they're even being attacked at all. The other problem is we don't really know how much these attacks are going to cost, because there's a lot of unknowns here. Who knows how many sales a company loses because they can't respond to email, their website goes down. If you have delays in shipping, who knows how much is you get a refund, or how much data you're losing because your servers have all been compromised. So in 2019, businesses reported to the FBI that they paid over or almost $9 million in ransom for these ransomware attacks. That's a lot of money for companies to be paying out. Small businesses could be absolutely devastated by having to pay out just $50,000 or $100,000 out of that $8.9 million. It really all depends on how much money that each individual company has to pay out to try to get their money back, or to get their data back, rather. And just because you pay the ransom does not mean you're actually going to get your data back. There's no guarantee that once you pay the ransom, you're going to be able to actually get your data. That's the biggest problem with these things, is that if you do decide to pay that ransom, you could still be screwed. Now, attack volumes for these sorts of attacks are not going to go down. They're just going to go up, especially right now. Businesses are obviously slowing down right now as people work from home. People are not spending as much money to do various things. People aren't going out. All the brick and mortar style businesses are kind of hurting right now, and they're going to be hurting more and more over the next few weeks. There's nothing stopping these sorts of attacks from happening. These attackers are all at home doing these sorts of things, sending out the spam that starts these sorts of attacks. And so there's nothing that's going to be changing, and nothing's going to be slowing these people down. So these ransomware attacks, they happen pretty much every day. So it's going to be definitely worth keeping an eye on what's going on and what's happening with these sorts of attacks.
Unknown participant is now joining.
On the first 5 days of 2012, so this year, this calendar year, one ransomware attack was announced on every single day. That's a really scary statistic and a really bad way to start off a whole new year. When you've got companies saying, yes, we were attacked. Again, a lot of these attacks are not reported. So there were probably more than one successful ransomware attack every single day. But this is just what companies were willing to admit was happening. So the problem, or one of the big problems with these sorts of attacks, is these attacks can happen not just against you, but against your hosting provider. A lot of hosting providers out there are susceptible to these sorts of attacks, and they have not built their infrastructure in such a way that these can be prevented. So we can end up having the hosting provider being attacked, not you, not your company, and then suddenly we've got all sorts of problems because now all our servers are down, and there's literally nothing we can do about it because there was nothing we could have done to prevent it, because the hosting providers, either VMware or Hyper-V farms, are all encrypted, and now we can't access our VMs. So this is obviously a huge, huge problem, because now we're talking about doing resource of our VMs, and hopefully we've got that disaster recovery policy or disaster recovery plan in place so we can actually implement that, because now we're in a disaster and we need to figure out what to do. So there have been multiple hosting providers that have been held for ransom. A quick Google search will show you how many hosting providers have admitted that they have this problem. And they have to be more honest and more open about this sort of thing than a regular company does, or a regular company, quote unquote, being a normal anyone who's not in a hosting provider role. The reason being is when they get breached, hundreds or thousands of companies are suddenly down and suddenly having issues. So they really don't have a choice about being open about these sorts of things. When a hosting provider gets compromised, you've suddenly got all sorts of problems. You've now got your web servers being compromised. So any web server you have is now just booting up to a screen that says, "Congratulations, you've been ransomware." Web servers probably are not displaying your website. Your website's probably corrupted, or encrypted rather. So even if the website is displaying, it's just displaying garbage that's not actually useful to be seen. Any virtual machines you have been compromised if your hosting provider has been compromised. So that's all your VMs that are running SQL Server, running Oracle, running MySQL, that are running IIS, that are running your applications. These are all encrypted and compromised. And odds are the VMs probably aren't even going to start because the underlying OS, the hypervisor, isn't going to be able to start that virtual machine because it can't decrypt the virtual machine's hard drive. Now, the really scary thing of this is depending on how long the hosting provider that you're using is down for, your company could end up having to go out of business while you try to recover this. Depending on how long they're down for and how bad the infection is at their level, with the host level, you may not be able to survive an outage if you don't have a DR plan, if you don't have some sort of disaster recovery plan in place to get things back up in a relatively quick period of time. Because the longer you're down for, the more money you're going to be losing. There's a Gartner report that came out a while ago. I think I have the number on the slide deck somewhere. And it says that the average outage for a company of this level is going to cost you $5,600 per minute. Now, obviously, that's an average, so that's going to take into account Fortune 100s versus small, medium businesses. But that's a big number to try to figure out how to deal with in the event that you do have to take things offline. How these things work is, you've got to restore. So how do you restore if your hosting provider has all your data encrypted? You have to have all the data that you need to restore outside of that provider. So you can't be relying on the provider to do your tape backups or to do your backups. You need to be able to offload that to your own backup policy so that you can do those restores yourself and not have to rely on them. That's really the only way you're going to be able to guarantee that you're not restoring bad data, because who knows how long the encryption's been in place for. On top of that, you may end up having to do performance tuning to get things back to where they were before. So I'll share a story with you that you can go download and read the case study on. We had a client come to us about 6-8 months ago. They got ransomware. Their entire infrastructure got encrypted. And so they literally had to restore everything. Every single VM they had, had to get restored. Once they restored those virtual machines, they were still in a fairly bad place. So there was a script that they were running manually. It was a manual once-a-day thing that I ran. And it normally took 20 seconds to run. Once they had restored all the servers, it then suddenly took 40 seconds to run. On top of that, there were parts of their application that were timing out when they tried to do them. So the problem is that the parts of the app that were timing out were the parts where they could buy more inventory to sell. So they could sell what they had, but they couldn't actually buy more product. So that sort of leaves you in a bad situation of you can sell what's on the shelves. In this case, they're a parts reseller for cars. So you could sell what's in the lot, but you couldn't actually buy more cars to put on the lot because that part of the app was just timing out. So after we restored and we got the systems back up and running, we then suddenly had to do some performance tuning to actually get them back to where they could actually make money. So what we were able to do was do this performance tuning, get them back up and running. That process that used to take 20 seconds, so that was taking 40 seconds. Once we were done with it, it took under a minute to run. And we got all their solutions back and running so they could actually buy products to resell. So obviously that was kind of good for them because they could stay in business that way. And this was not a Fortune 100, I think. This was a relatively small company. I want to say a couple hundred employees. They've got about a dozen or 14 stores, I want to say, spread across the U.S., mostly on the East Coast. I think 1 or 2 out here on the West Coast. So relatively small companies. So they didn't have a ton of money they could throw at this problem. And they were really happy with the fact that we could get them back online and get things working again once they were back online. So how do we solve these problems? We know what these problems are now, but how do we actually get people to solve these problems? Because there's people-based solutions and then there's technical solutions. So let's talk about those people-based solutions first. So what do? We obviously have to hope that we aren't compromised, but we don't want to have our entire plan be based around hope. We hope that we're not going to be compromised, but we plan for the fact that we are going to probably be compromised at some point. If we don't plan for the fact that we might be compromised, then when that does happen, or if that does happen rather, we suddenly have no way of dealing with it. And having no way of dealing with it is not a good idea. So what should people be doing? There are several things that people can do to help prevent ransomware attacks. First thing, don't click links in email from unknown people. This should be something we all know, but it's really not. Don't open attachments from unknown people. This is the number one way that viruses can get into our environment, or ransomware can get into our environment and spread through our environment. Don't click links in emails that you aren't expecting, even if they're from people that you think you know. So this is a perfect case for a story. So one of our clients, their CEO got an email from a friend of his. So to make this even worse, he was actually buying something from a friend. It was something big, a boat or something like that. So something in the 5-figure range. So he was actually expecting some sort of email from this person. He got an email. He clicked the link in the email, which took him to what looked like an Azure Active Directory sign-in screen. So it asked for his username and his password. He entered his username and his password, clicked enter or submit or whatever it was. He didn't bother to look at the URL that it was taking him to. And it actually took his username and password and, in this case, just stored it. It didn't actually do anything with it. Now, at this point, bad things could have happened if he didn't report this to IT. Fortunately, this particular CEO immediately called the head of IT, told them what he had done, and the head of IT, I happened to be there when all this happened, the head of IT and the IT department could immediately jump into action. So the first thing they did was take his laptop and send it off to a recovery shop to make sure there was nothing on it that there shouldn't be, and to see what had been, do forensics on it, to see what had been compromised. As that was happening by one person, another person reset his password so that his old password was dead. They then immediately synced that up to Azure Active Directory so that his on-prem password and his cloud password were again the same, and that his Azure Active Directory password was immediately changed. Once the forensics had been done on the laptop, that obviously took a few days, that laptop was simply formatted and was rebuilt from the ground up. The CEO was given a temporary laptop while all this was happening so that he could keep working. So this was a good thing because nothing could get into the network. Fortunately, this thing didn't try to do anything. No emails were sent out that anybody saw. Nothing was done with this information, thankfully. The hard part about this was the email he got was from an email address that was a friend of his. So we're assuming spear phishing was in place here because it was from somebody he knew. And it was sent at about the right time that he was expecting another email to come in. So this was a fairly hard situation to be in because of that, because the email was an email that was basically expected. So that's where things could get really, really complicated. So this is going to go into something that's not on the slide, but probably should be, that even if you do get those emails from people that you are expecting to get emails from, look at the URL and make sure it's a valid URL. So in this case, when we clicked on the URL on a laptop that was disconnected from the corporate network, we could see that it was taking us to some PHP web page on some random domain. It wasn't PayPal or something along those lines, or Zelle or something we were expecting to see. It was some random domain with some PHP website or PHP web page rather, and it was not the Azure portal, login portal that we would normally expect to see in the URL. So we immediately knew something was wrong based on just the URL. So one of the things we actually implemented to help solve this problem is we changed the background of the Azure Active Directory sign-in screen for their domain. So once you enter in their username, username at domain.com, and hit tab to go to the password field, the background will change from the generic Microsoft background to the actual background for that company. Now we told employees, if you don't see that background, then this is definitely a phishing attack and it's something you're going to need to take care of and report to IT and don't actually click on. So the last thing on the slide here is don't open attachments.
Cybernetics
Is now joining.
So you got to be very careful with anything that comes in and make sure that it's not that you're not getting something sent to you that you're not expecting to get sent. So this is something that's been going around for a long time. All employees need to be trained to detect phishing emails when they come in. There's a lot of companies out there that will do both the training and the testing to make sure that your employees don't click on emails they're not supposed to be clicking on. So a lot of times they'll have a PowerPoint presentation or some other presentation that every employee can read, or every employee can watch rather, and they'll verify that every employee actually does what they're supposed to do, that every employee does spend the 20 or 30 minutes or whatever it takes to go through the presentation and see all the different ways that emails can come in, what they need to be looking for. And then they'll send out test emails to test the employees and see just how much employees are paying attention to what's actually going on. So hopefully you can get really good scores when these emails go out. And what these emails are going to do is they're going to come from some third-party email address. It's going to be like, support at, or my company support at gmail.com or something like that. Something that should look suspicious. And they're going to say something like, hey, we see that, your your password's about to expire. Click here to reset your password or something along those lines. And there'll be spelling errors in it. And it should be hopefully fairly obvious for people to see. But they're going to look a lot like a normal phishing email as people try to get their usernames and passwords. So most of these sorts of attacks for ransomware are going to come in through some sort of phishing. Odds are your company's not being what we call spear phished. So you're not being targeted. You're just part of a blanket phishing scheme where they're sending out millions of emails hoping to get a few people to actually click on them. While phishing should be stopped fairly early on in the email process, it's hopefully going to be stopped by either your email servers or your email provider, it doesn't always get stopped there. So I know if you've got things like Office 365, there's a lot of anti-phishing stuff built into the platform. So those will automatically be sent to the junk folder. Third-party hosted Exchange or on-prem Exchange will have a lot of the same functionality. You can also route emails through various providers upstream of before those emails actually get to you, so they can do inspection of those emails to make sure you're not having any phishing emails sent to you. And they all do a decent job, but obviously nothing's perfect. Things are going to get through. So because of that, employees need to know not to open unknown attachments. They need to know not to click on links, because that's how these email or these attacks are going to vector into your corporate environment. These phishing attacks are going to appear to come from relatively known sources. I get regular email attacks coming into my account that look like they're from friends of mine. They look like they're from people who I know I'm in the contact list of, because those contact lists got downloaded at some point, probably years ago, because some of my email addresses, or my main personal email address is probably 17 years old at this point, so it's in tens of thousands of people's contact lists probably. And just as it gets downloaded from those lists, it gets spammed out. And so the emails will look like they're coming from a person I know. The name will be correct, the email address will be wrong. There'll be some bogus email address because they don't want the bounces going to somebody that I might know who can then tell me, hey, by the way, these emails that look like I've been sending them out, I actually haven't been. So there's lots of ways that these sneaky emails will try to get themselves into your network. And there's lots of training that people need to do because every employee needs to be aware that these sort of things are happening and that they need to be aware to try and stop these sorts of things. So we'll talk a little bit about what people need to do, what our general employee base needs to do to try to solve these problems. So what do we need to do on a technical level to try to solve these problems at the company level? What sort of technical solutions can we put in place to try to solve some of these problems? Well, the first one I mentioned earlier, we need to be scanning emails before they come in to try to stop anything that's spam from actually coming into employees. That's going to be the first thing, because if the emails can't get to the employee, that's going to take care of a large portion of what's happening. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it'll solve a lot of them. Another big problem that we have going around is ransomware attacks will come in through things like advertising networks on legitimate websites. So right now, it was just announced earlier today or yesterday, I saw on Twitter, one of the websites that's hosting information about the coronavirus is actually pushing down a virus as part of what you're seeing on the screen. So it's injecting something into web browser or into unpatched web browsers that's infecting machines. So there can be some definite issues coming in there. Even if you are blocking emails, you still want to be doing something like a web proxy to inspect web traffic to see what's actually being pushed down. And obviously having some sort of antivirus on these computers is going to catch a lot of these things as well. What we want is some network segmentation as well. That's going to solve a lot of these problems as well. What I mean by network segmentation is we want workstations on one set of network environment, we want servers on another network environment, and the two should basically never be talking to each other. We don't want very many openings between the servers and the users. That's going to go with this next piece here is locking down the server networks so that we can't have that communication going. We definitely don't want wide open networks between our users and our servers anymore. We want to close down everything that's not actually needed. So domain controllers, we're going to need a bunch of network ports to be open. We're going to need access on port 1433 to our SQL servers. We're going to need access on port 80 and port 443 on our web servers, both internal and external, to make sure that we've got that sort of connectivity open. But things we don't want are things open like remote desktop. We don't want RDP open because that's a great way for an attack to get from the user network into the server network. Because RDP is not the most well-protected protocol. There are some known vulnerabilities for remote desktop so that people can't get in. That's why you don't want remote desktop open to the outside world, for example, to the public internet. On top of that, more protection beyond that, we want
cybernetics.
Is now exiting.
Between our admin access to the servers and our normal desktop access to desktops. Sorry, my Alexa is going off, so let me shut her up. We don't want the same accounts to be accessing the servers and the desktops. So the account that you use to get email should not have access to any servers beyond what a normal user would have access to. If you need access to servers, if you need to RDP to servers, for example, you should have some sort of other account that you can use to log on to those servers with, because that will then prevent you from having to give your normal desktop access to that environment.
Rick at Cybernetics.
One of the
Is
big
now joining.
is protect servers from employees. That's just a fact of life. We have to assume the employee network is going to get compromised. So part of that is going to involve keeping the servers and the workstation networks totally isolated from each other. This way, if somebody's workstation gets compromised, and then that spreads to other workstations in the workstation environment, that's obviously bad, but we don't want that getting into the servers. We don't want any sort of infection getting all the way to the servers, because that's where production problems and production outages are going to end up happening. So we need to keep those separate from each other. Because if the workstation network gets compromised and everybody's workstation gets ransomware, fine. We'll format every machine, we'll re-image all the boxes. It's going to suck because we're going to be down for a couple of days. The users aren't going to be able to work, but the customers are still going to be able to buy stuff, and we're still going to be able to sell stuff. That's what really matters. We're not taking down production servers at that point. We're only taking down workstations. Because we want this total isolation to happen, we should have nothing open from the workstations to the servers except what's actually and immediately needed for people to be able to do their work. Now, part of this is going to involve not having remote desktop access from workstations to servers, except for via a jump host. So we're going to want to set some sort of box up in our server environment so that our admins can RDP to that, and then that box has access to the rest of the server environment. But we don't want our admins to be able to access our server environment directly through remote desktop in their normal machines. Now, if possible, if you're in something like Azure, Azure's got a great service called Bastion Hosts. This bypasses the need for a jump box. And instead of going to RDPing to a jump box, you actually go to the Azure portal. You authenticate against the Azure portal using MFA and all of your normal Azure Active Directory authentication credentials that you use. You go find the VM that you need, and then you can use the Azure Bastion host and log into the actual server's console through remote desktop. And what this does is it puts it in a web browser for you. So you're not worrying about RDP being open to servers. You don't have to give any of your servers a public IP address unless they're like a web server or something where they actually need internet access. So it's a nice, secure environment for you to actually be able to do stuff in and actually be able to have users connecting to servers even if they need to. Sorry, cough. When you're setting this up, if you've got servers in different segments of your server network, you probably want to restrict access there as well. You can do this by subnetting things off. You can put firewalls, or if you're in something like Azure network security groups, between those subnets so that users can't talk to each other and can't potentially infect one server network to another. So you want things like your internal web servers to not be able to talk to your SQL servers, or your app servers not be able to talk to your database servers unless you've actually specifically opened up that network access. That way, if one set of servers is compromised, you're not losing all your servers. You're only losing a small number of them. So the whole idea here is we minimize the amount of damage that can happen to an environment as opposed to letting the entire environment potentially get screwed up and get owned. So users obviously need access to things like files because you're probably going to have a file server. The user are probably going to have access to it. You want those users to have access to as few files on there as possible. That way, if they do get infected with something like a ransomware virus and it encrypts their workstation, it can't encrypt very much on the file server. File servers are the big gaping hole we have. They're also the easiest way to see that something has gone wrong. Because if a user does get ransomware on their machine, that ransomware is able to go find their file servers because they have a map drive to a file server, and it goes across that map drive and encrypts files. people are going to notice really fast that they can't open the files anymore. Word docs are going to be encrypted. When people double click on them, Word isn't going to open. It's probably just going to open something that says, hey, you've been ransomware. So these are things that are going to be fairly easy to figure out, though we'll just restore the file server. But we don't want users to be able to access very many files if they don't need to. This is where that whole concept of least privileges comes into effect. We want to make sure the users can only access what they need to access in order to get their actual job done. Anybody with, again, admin access to a server should have multiple accounts. One for email access that probably doesn't have any access to files, and one that has server admin access so they can actually get onto the server and do the admin level things that they need to do. But their normal user account probably isn't going to have access. For example, somebody in IT, their normal user account probably will not have access to the HR share on the file server because they don't need it as part of their normal job. Their admin account will, because they're a domain admin, they've got access to everything, they've got ownership of files, so they can see things, but not from their normal user account, because we want to protect those HR files in case the admin gets ransomware and gets their machine ransomware, and the ransomware is able to run under their user account. What do we do when things happen? So obviously, we hope that we never get ransomware, we hope that we never get breached. But how do we actually recover from this sort of situation? So, rule number one, never pay the ransom. There is no guarantee that you can recover your data. Now, obviously, paying the ransom is a very individual decision. Some companies want to because they want to be able to get back what they have. They think if they pay the ransom that they're going to be able to, but that's not always the case. So I've got a couple of articles here that I want to share with you. So a city paid the ransom in this first article, but they did not get their files back. So once they gave up on actually getting their files back after paying the ransom, years worth of work had been lost. So what these folks were doing is they were scanning in city documents that they had gathered over the years. So they were scanning them to probably PDF or JPEG or something. Now they were scanning over 100 years worth of documents that the city had collected over the years, so over time. The machine that was doing all that scanning was then ransomware. So they figured they'd pay the ransom and get their data back. They paid the ransom, they got nothing back. So they ended up losing, took years to scan in all these documents. They lost all that time, plus obviously the money they paid for the ransomware. So second article is worse. An Arkansas-based telemarketing firm sent home about 300 employees in October of 2019. You may have seen this on the news. So they sent home all these people in October and said, hey, we've been ransomware, we're trying to restore. The company left the doors open, told employees to call back on January 2nd for a status update and find out what was going on, in case they were able to actually do the restore. They were not. They were not able to restore the systems, and they laid off all the people. And they didn't even tell them when the people called in on January 2nd. They just got a message saying, all right, you're all being laid off. Good luck. Enjoy the new year. Enjoy not having a job, right after the holidays. So that was obviously a very, very bad situation to be in. And again, even if they had paid the ransom, and I believe the ransom in this case was a 7-figure ransom, there's no guarantee they would have actually gotten their data back. So how do we get back and get up and running again once we've been the victim of ransomware? We restore. We have to restore. The only solution we have here is take down all the servers that are affected, probably all the servers, throw them all away. So trash all the VMs, toss all the VMs out the window, and then start restoring VMs to get back up and running. To make sure these backups are good and you can restore from these backups, we have to test the backups periodically and make sure we can actually restore in the event of an outage. There's an old saying, a backup is only as good as the last test to ensure it was good. And that is very, very true. We need to test these backups and make sure that they are actually going to do what we need to do. There are numerous instances of companies, both that have been ransomware and just doing a normal restore, where they go to restore a server and find out that the backup they were expecting to be good doesn't actually work. I remember one company years ago now, I'm assuming this has long been fixed, the company was doing tape backups of servers every single day, just like they were told to do. What was actually happening though is the backups were not actually writing to the tape. There was something wrong with the tape drive. So all that was on the tape was a blank tape. And so they had nothing to restore from. Another company, actually similar situation, they didn't notice, they never changed the tape. So they were literally just running over the same tape over and over and over again. So all they had was a part of their environment backed up, and that was it. And it was not the part they needed to restore. So these sorts of scary things can happen, and you want to find these out before you have a problem, not after you have a problem. Because if you find out you have a problem after the event has taken place, you're kind of screwed. So when you do this recovery is going to take potentially a long time. It just depends on how big your environment is as to how long it's going to take. Expect recovery to take days or weeks. So the company I talked about earlier that got ransomware in that case study that you can go download and read, it took them about 3 days just to restore everything, and it took us about another, I want to say 3 days. It was a while ago, and I'm probably not remembering this quite right, but about another 3 or 4 days to do the performance tuning to get them back up to where they could actually buy and sell product again, or in this case, buy product again. This is a slide somewhere. The Gartner estimate that an outage is going to cost $5,600 per minute that you're down. So keep that in mind. That number may be high or low for your company, but that's the average that Gartner says, and you're looking at a big cost to get things back up and running, and just for the amount of time you're going to be down. Recovery, if in a ransomware sort of situation, is going to require rebuilding every server in your environment. Just assume that you're going to have to rebuild everything, that you're going to need to have backups of everything. Your disaster recovery plan of what to do in the event of this sort of situation is going to need to be stored on somewhere that can't be encrypted. One of the problems I've seen when I've talked to customers is, yeah, so we're, in the event that you're ransomware, what do you do? Oh, we go to our internal SharePoint site, which is still hosted on-prem, and we bring up this disaster recovery plan, and then we walk through it. Okay, cool. What happens when you can't get to that because the SharePoint servers have all been encrypted? Oh yeah, we're screwed. Okay, so we need to plan for that, and we need to have that disaster recovery plan either somewhere that can't be encrypted, so on some website, in blob storage, in Azure, in a bucket in AWS with a password protection on it so we can't have other people seeing it, or even print it out. I've seen some companies where they actually physically print out the disaster recovery plan. And so then in the event that something absolutely catastrophic happens, they can literally just go to the paper and start walking through things. Obviously, they do have to print a new copy when things change dramatically, but that's what they have to do, so they go ahead and print it up. So, the emergency response. So we have a new offering that we're announcing as of right now from Denny Train Associates Consulting called our Emergency Response Service. So this is going to help our customers that do suffer from a disaster recover from that disaster and plan for that disaster as well. So one of the big things about this service is we're going to start before your disaster happens. We don't want you signing up for the service after you've already had a problem. You want to sign up for this service ahead of time. And the reason for that is because of what's going to come with this service. So we're going to include up to 8 hours a month of emergency response service as part of this. So you can call us up and go, hey, server's down, our environment's down, and you need help getting this back up and running. And we're going to start working right away, and you've already got the 8 hours of time already pre-booked into that response. We're also going to help you do a review of your disaster recovery plan. We're going to review that annually with you so we can see what problems are and what we think is missing from the disaster recovery plan. And then we're going to also help you test that disaster recovery plan as part of the service. As part of the service, you're going to get a quick response time from our team of engineers that are dedicated to the service. Those engineers are going to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And those are not going to be third-party employees. Those are actually going to be Demi Cherry and Associates Consulting employees that are going to be staffing the service. So you don't have to worry about being shuffled off to some third party or fourth party so that you don't know who they are. Getting assistance in dealing with these recoveries, we can actually reduce the recovery time because we can start right away. Your staff probably can't work 24/7 for days on end because they need to be able to do things like sleep. They need to be able to de-stress, even though this is obviously a very stressful situation. We can help reduce that because we've got a team that can help deal with those sorts of problems and help go through these recovery efforts while your team can get that sleep that they need, and they can come back the next day a little more refreshed. They can actually then work on the restores and engage us as needed to get these things back up and running. And we can help you do that sort of failover and get things back up and running and get things back up. If you want more information about the service, go to dcac.com/go/ER, and that's going to redirect you to the page for that service. The page should be up in about 2 minutes if I remember how I scheduled it correctly. So keep in mind, the average downtime cost is $5,600 per minute. That's a huge cost for companies. So we want to reduce the risk, and we want to reduce the possibility of having to take any sort of downtime and be down for hours, days, or God forbid, weeks. I think we've got a couple of questions, or John may have already answered them in the chat.
Yeah, one of them, Danny, was about recording of the webinar. Will that be available somewhere?
Yes. So a recording of the webinar will happen. It should be happening right now. Once I get that copy back from Microsoft Teams, I'll go ahead and upload that to the website. So you can either view that on the website. We'll also be sending out a copy to everybody that signed up for the webcast so they can view it at their own discretion. And you'll get I believe we're going to send out a copy of the slide deck with a couple of extra slides, a little bit about us information I didn't cover today. But yeah, the webcast is being recorded, and we'll send out a copy of that to everyone so that you can see it, or you can just view it straight from our website, probably later today or tomorrow at the earliest.
Cool. And then there was another question from Rob. Should user accounts, even admin, have access to SQL backup files? I answered backups should be offsite and sequestered away and access limited.
Exiting.
Oops. And if access is needed, then utilize a secondary admin account, as you mentioned through the presentation. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just double what you just said. Yeah, you should ideally be storing those backups offsite with your user accounts not able to access those files. So something like backup to URL, or if you're in AWS, throw a web server or a file server up rather, and write to those, and don't have any of your admins have access to that other than through their admin accounts. SQL Server obviously is going to need access to it. You can do some interesting things and with removing access after backup jobs run and stuff like that. So you can do some interesting things at that point to ensure that SQL can't touch those backups after those backups have been made. You just want to document all those changes that you are making, so that in the event there is a problem, you can have somebody go through the docs and figure out how to actually restore those backups and bring things back if they need to be brought back.
Totally agree. And then I don't know if this is the same Rob, but another question from Rob: rebuilding servers take time. How do you recommend reducing that time, especially for older estates?
So how do we recommend reducing the time to restore servers? So that would be some sort of high availability solution. It's going to be your best bet there to minimize that time. So if you've got a more modern version of SQL Server, always on availability groups, wrong word. If you've got an older version of SQL Server, failover clustering is probably your only option if you're in SQL 2000 and AR2 or below, or even if you're in 2012 and you weren't up for setting up availability groups when that first came out. So high availability is going to be your saving grace there. If all the nodes of your environment are compromised, which is probably going to happen if one node gets compromised, you've got a decent chance of losing the rest of them as well. Then you're in a restore situation. Typically, when it comes to database servers, what we've seen is it's not typically worth restoring the actual OS of the server, especially if you're in a cloud environment like Azure, AWS, GCP. You can deploy a new server and then just restore the databases a lot faster than you can do an actual restore of the server itself, of the VM. I did a restore of a VM recently. I need to get some files off the domain controller. And it was only a 1 terabyte plus 128 gig VM, and it still took like 2 hours to restore. So if you've got a big database server, it could take a lot longer to restore, and that's probably not the state your databases need to be in, because that's going to be a daily snapshot of the VM versus losing 10 minutes of data through your T-log backups. So once you restore the OS, you're then going to have to restore the databases again anyway. So you may as well just rebuild the box and then restore the data files or the databases on top of that. So this does mean not having anything else installed on your SQL servers. So that's obviously going to be a big piece of it. Ooh, excuse me. But as long as you know what's on those boxes, or there's nothing on the box, but SQL Server, then it should be fairly easy to actually do that restore and get that box back up and running in a fairly small amount of time. The trick is going to be making sure that you plan ahead of time to actually do that restore. And if you've planned correctly, then you'll be good to go and good to restore as quickly as possible. So I believe that's all the questions that we have. I don't see anything else. I've got a laptop here that's watching the webcast, so I'll slide the switch because that's how I'll know that I'm done talking. I
don't see any more questions.
All right, cool. Yeah, so assuming nothing else comes in, if you do have more questions, feel free to email me. Sorry, I can't talk. Denny@dcac.com is my email address. You can obviously hit us up on the website, www.dcac.com. You can hit me up on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Feel free to hit me up if you have questions or if you want more information on our new disaster recovery or emergency response service. Otherwise, thank you very much for spending an hour with me today. You'll get an email from us with the recording probably the next couple of days. But, thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.